Whenever you're ready, Brandy, you can start the recording. Brandy's doing solo. She's running back and forth. Jean's out sick tonight, so. I need somebody to add.
Binoculars, Brandy?
I need somebody to add a business item.
I did already.
F, official newspaper.
Good.
All right. I'm going to welcome you and call to order the October 25th Port Orchard City Council regular meeting. And I always like to start these meetings with our guiding principles, which are we raising the bar? Are we honoring the past but not living in the past? Are we building connections with outside partners? And is the decision-making process positively impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion? So please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, we have a published agenda. Councilmember Terneri, would you like to add anything to the agenda this evening?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to add a resolution authorizing the city and the official newspaper of the city and repealing resolution number 070-22 to the agenda, please.
Okay, so is there a motion or a second?
Second.
We've got a motion and a second to add a business item 7F, this official newspaper. Councilmember Chang?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to remove.
Let's vote on the motion we have on the floor first, and then I'll take some others. So, and any discussion of adding business item F? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And item F has been added. Councilmember Chang, do you have a modification of the agenda?
Yes, I do. I would like to remove consent agenda item 4F and move it to business items 7F.
Okay. 7G.
It'd be 7G.
I'm sorry, yes.
Yep, just at city news. For potential conflict,
Yes.
we'd probably call out the conflict and leave it on consent. I don't think there is one.
No.
This is the chaplain services?
Oh, it's Title VI.
No.
F.
Transportation for Title V.
It's an agreement with my employer.
Title VI
For
requirements.
appearance's sake, I think it should be removed.
I'll second it.
Okay. So consent. Item F is, so I have a motion by Councilmember Chang, a second by Councilmember Clausen to take consent item F, which is the adoption of a resolution approving an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation for Title VI requirements, and move it to business item, it would be G.
7G.
7G. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that has been moved on the agenda. Any other modifications being asked for this evening? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to approve the agenda? Councilmember Clausen.
Mr. Mayor, I move we approve the agenda as modified.
Motion by Councilmember Clausen, a second by Councilmember Cacciardi to approve the modified agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the agenda has been set for this evening. We are to our first citizen comment period, and this is for any items on the agenda. Second citizen comment period at the end of the meeting for any items. And I see no one in our audience, and if you're online, you raised your hand, the clerk will bring you in, and I don't see anybody online either. So I will close the first citizen comment period. We are to consent items. Is there a motion to approve? Councilmember Clausen.
Mayor, I move we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilmember Clausen and a trio of seconds. I'll give it to Councilmember Terneri. And any discussion of the modified consent agendas? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda is approved unanimously. we have a presentation, or excuse me, a public hearing, not a presentation, on property tax revenue sources for the 2023 current expense budget for the 23-24 budget and satisfying the requirements of RCW 8455-120. Mr. Crocker, this is you.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. The city legislative body is required to hold a public hearing on current expense budget revenue sources for the coming biennial budget, including consideration of possible increases in property tax revenues. The hearing must be held before the legislative body votes on a property tax levy for the upcoming year. The deadline for setting the levy for property tax for 2023 is November 30th, 2022. The hearing will include a presentation of revenue sources and estimates for 23-24. The hearing relates to setting the 23 levy for property tax collection in the first year of our 23-24 biennial budget. So I'd like to open the public hearing first with the presentation and then go to public comment if there is some afterwards.
Okay, so at this time, we will open the public hearing. I don't get to do that very often. Council members, this is on the dais here for you too, if you want to follow, if you can't see it as well up there.
I think we're short a couple. Yep. I'll look at yours. I'll look on mine. I lied, I found it.
No one made it really small now. Wow. You know, we have printed copies.
Oh, nice high contrast colors, thank you.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Brandy. All right. So again, we're going to have a presentation on the revenue sources for the upcoming budget. Oh, yeah. I can hear this. Brandy? Perfect. So in accordance with RCW 8455-120, we are required to hold this public hearing on revenue sources for the general fund in order to set the property tax levy for 2023. We are focused on the current expense or general fund for tonight's discussion, as the purpose is to review revenues for the current expense budget in order to adopt the property tax. So on this slide, if you can see, is the current 23-24 biennial budget for tax revenue only. This amounts to roughly $25,076,000 for the 2-year period. In this slide, we identify 3 main taxing categories. Sales tax at $13.46 million, property tax at $6.874 million, and finally, a general other taxes category making up the remainder of our taxing sources. Go ahead, Brandy. Will you slide that down? Thank you. So in this slide, we provide greater detail on those 3 main taxing categories. We identify how much we have allocated by fiscal year and the percentage of the overall tax source each represents. Sales tax is the largest tax source, representing nearly 53% of our biennial budget, followed by property tax, representing roughly 27% of the budget. Finally, other taxes represent roughly 19%. I highlighted in the box the top 3 tax sources and then further identified other taxes. Of the other tax categories, the top 3 budgeted represent roughly 12% of the overall 19% as identified. And those were the electric tax, telephone tax, as well as utilities taxes that are the top 3 of the other taxes category. We complete the biennial revenue picture by adding in all sources of funding, which are identified in the smaller pie chart with anticipated revenue of roughly $4.12 million. These other revenue sources, the top three categories of these other revenue sources are intergovernmental, made up of primarily federal and state grant revenue, motor vehicle fuels tax, as well as paths and trails, charges for goods and services, that's primarily from planning and court fees, and then licenses and permits, again, primary business licenses and building permits. I want to comment briefly on the fuel tax because this has been a discussion point in the past. Looking back at fiscal year 21, we budgeted $285,000 and received $284,000. Looking at fiscal year 2022, we budgeted $285,000 and have received thus far $227,000, which means we are on pace to meet our budget. So with that, I think $285,000 is still a good budget figure, and that is what we have in our 23-24 budget coming forward. On this next slide, we'll take a look at the 23-24 budget compared, or excuse me, the 21-22 budget compared with the proposed 23-24. Again, you'll notice tax revenue is budgeted to increase, total tax revenue is budgeted to increase roughly 10%. Sales tax is 11.5% higher than what we budgeted. Property tax is roughly 11% higher. And as you'll see when we get into the property tax breakdown, this is really driven by new construction. And again, in this, this doesn't have the year to date, but informationally, we have not received our October payments yet, so that's still yet to come. On the other taxes, which represent roughly 14% of the total, we are budgeting reductions. So recall in this current biennial period, mid-year review, we trued up the revenues for 21, and then we did not do that for 2022. We took a more conservative approach and kind of left the revenue budget as is. So you can kind of see why we're heavier in our budget for 21-22 when we compare it to 23-24. When we developed the budget for 23-24, we reverted back to kind of historical norms as far as those revenue sources. And three categories to highlight are the license and permits, which are 29% of our biennial budget for this category, and consist of building activity. So again, taking kind of a more conservative approach than the adjustment we made in the 21 period. The other big budget item there is the intergovernmental. You'll see that drops from $5 million to roughly $1 million. Again, keep in mind that's money from grants. So we had the ARPA money, roughly $3 million. We had $1 million from the PFD for the community center. So that's roughly a $4 million drop right there as we kind of put those in different categories. So nothing to be alarmed about. It's just, reflecting kind of really how we're budgeting the revenues to come in. And charges for services, again, 20% of the biennial budget for this category. These are all plan check fees, again, resulting of building activity. So overall, what's interesting, I think, and we talked about the budget last week, is that overall impact to the 23-24 biennial budget is a reduction of revenues by roughly 6.5% when we compared to the current biennial budget. But again, a lot of the current biennial budget revenue is really driven by those large grants that we received, the greater building impact revenue that we've realized this current year. So I think that's okay. I don't think that's alarming. I think it's there's a story behind why there is a reduction in revenue. So we're kind of returning back to a base that is fiscally responsible and in line with what we have proposed on the expenditure side of the budget. So next we'll take a look specifically at the property tax. This table highlights historic property tax data and the proposed property tax levy for 2025. As a reminder, property tax represents 27% of the budget of our tax revenue for our current expense fund 001 and our street operations fund 002. For 2023, we are proposing a property tax levy of roughly $3.435 million. Again, as a reminder, Washington State has the most complex property tax methodology nationwide, and Washington State has a budget-based system for property taxation, which means as part of the budget process, the city establishes the amount of the tax revenue needed to fund the budget, and that's what we will be taking action on tonight, establishing that levy. The city will certify to the county by November 30th, and for 2023, we've identified a total of $3.435 million levy needed. Again, that number could adjust depending on outcomes of our other special districts like the fire districts and school districts.
No, if I remember correctly, that levy rate, we reside in a bucket of $2. with the fire district, the library district, and us, correct? And if, when they pass measures, then we end up getting squeezed. So our assessed valuation has got up dramatically, but you can see over the years that our levy rate goes down. We are getting more in taxes, but it's a result of voter-approved measures that do impact the city. I'm not saying that voters shouldn't approve those, I'm just pointing that out.
Correct, correct. And I should have mentioned at the start of this, I did put a revised, or the clerks provided a revised staff report, as well as we revised the presentation. The county notified us yesterday that they adjusted our assessed value. So the levy amount the city needs did not change. But in that calculation, you'll see here we have $2,998,000 up there for assessed value. If you look back to the previous presentation I provided last week, I think that was at $3,062,338,000. So different number. We adjusted it based, and the adjustment was based on the county just settled with our city receiving exemptions. So certain buildings are exempt from the property tax. Again, council took action this biennial period to provide that as an incentive for development. And so we did have a completion of that, and we took roughly $18 million off the property tax rolls as a part of this kind of 23-24. So that did reduce our revenue by about $25,000 per year. And I believe Nick confirmed it's for the next 8 years what that exemption was for.
It's the multifamily tax exemption that we put in place to incent obviously multifamily developments.
So again, on this slide, we just show the property taxes collections over time. You can see that we've seen positive growth in property tax revenue collections. Again, this growth is really due to new construction. Next slide. Thank you. So here we compare 2022 with 2023 for the levy amount. We have $3.182 million was the final levy for 2022. In 2023, we can collect an additional $20,000, but at that point, we hit our lid. We then add in new construction, and let me see mine. Yep, 196. So $196,000 is coming from new construction on the tax rolls. So that's a real positive for us. We always budget an additional $10,000 for utilities, although I've yet to see that come in, as the state has never thus far adjusted their assessed value for state utilities. So we budget it in case they do, in case there's an increase in those utilities or reduction, and we could actually realize some revenues. And then lastly, we are required by state statute to add in our refunds, and this year it's roughly $12,000, representing monies that were paid out to property owners after going through the dispute process. We are required to levy the refund amount and share it amongst all taxpayers. And this would bring us a total to $3,421,000. So more important than the property tax is our sales tax. And the city's Porches currently receives 0.84% of that sales tax. As we've discussed all year long, we've seen tremendous growth and strength in our sales tax. And year to date, we've collected 107% of our budgeted revenues. So far exceeding our expectations for 2022. Which is fantastic as we kind of move into our budget period. And I will note, I'll stay here, Brian, that's great. No, that's fine, thank you. I did want to note that we did factor in current sales tax revenue into our 23-24 budget, so we have accounted and forecasted and projected and used all the money at this point. So very excited to see the next 3 months. Hopefully we continue to see growth in sales tax. That could be a positive bump for us.
Noah? That 0.84 sales tax, does that include the 0.1% that we?
It does not.
Okay.
Yep. So next year we'll have to adjust that after that gets factored in.
Thank you.
And I've also talked with our staff about looking for notifications from Department of Revenue as far as what will the city's sales tax rate be going next year, because we don't know what the other entities in the county are going to do as far as the sales tax. So.
Thank you.
So this next slide, when comparing the first 3 quarters of 21 against the first 3 quarters of 22, again, we show a 12% growth in sales tax. For the 23-24 biennial budget, we are using a 3-year average for 23 with a 5% growth rate in 2024. So this is a little different than we have in previous budgets. In previous budgets, we've used a 5-year average, but in discussions with the Finance Committee and looking at the growth and strength of the sales tax, we elected to go with a 3-year average for that first base year to set that base year amount. So it did bump it up a little bit, but again, we feel confident that it's going to fall within the range and taking on appropriate risk. So this would provide us roughly $6.5 million for 2023 and another $6.9 million for 2024. Again, just another graph to show the sales tax collection, because recognizing that everyone absorbs information differently. You can see the 3-year actuals collections, and it's real strong in 2022. So with that, this concludes my remarks for the presentation, and I'll turn it back to the mayor to open it up to the public.
The public hearing is open. I see one attendee online. If you're wishing to testify on the public hearing related to the city's projected revenues, you would use the raise your hand feature, and the clerk would bring you into the meeting. One last chance, if anybody wishes to testify, use the raise your hand feature. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. All right, we're on to our business items. The first of which is 7A, adoption of an ordinance setting the amount of the property tax to be levied for the year 2023 pursuant to RCW 8455-120.
Mayor, council, I'll read the brief staff report and then we'll look for action. Okay, we just conducted the revenue hearing. We heard no comments or questions, so I'm assuming the information satisfies council's needs. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the chair to make a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt an ordinance setting the 2023 property tax levy and the amount of property tax to be raised for the budget year of 2023.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Clausen, a second by Councilmember Cacciardi. Is there any questions for Mr. Crocker on this matter? Okay.
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Is the estimate on the low side, so it could be higher than that once we get the final figures from the county?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Although we've been pretty spot on every year, so it's not going to deviate much. And I think that the biggest driver is that new construction, and then the other factor is the exemptions, which they've already kind of deducted out. So I think we're going to be pretty close to what the final tally is.
Any other questions? Right, you'll be voting on adoption of an ordinance setting the amount of the property tax to be levied for the 2023 year pursuant to RCW 8455-20. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the ordinance passes. We're at item B, adoption of a resolution authorizing the purchase of Kitsap County parcel number 4650-011-001-0001 for stormwater facilities. Ms. Archer, this is you.
Thank you, Mayor. Council members, before you this evening is a resolution authorizing the city to purchase Kitsap County tax parcel number 4650-011-001-0001 for the construction of a stormwater pond or facilities. This parcel is located at the south end of Sherman Avenue and is bordered by Blackjack Creek and the highway. This is a large vacant parcel of land that staff have been eyeing for quite some time based on information contained in both your comprehensive plan and in other legislative documents that direct the construction of a project, in particular the South Sydney Neighborhood Regional Drainage Improvement Plan, project number 11. So this purchase comes in furtherance of that goal. Staff have negotiated a sale price or a purchase price of the parcel of $850,000. The resolution reflects that purchase price along with an allocation for closing costs. Staff continue to negotiate the final terms of the purchase and sale agreement itself, but the seller has indicated an interest to close by the end of the year. So we felt it prudent, if council is comfortable, to bring this before you for council to be authorizing the sale at that sale purchase price with the terms of the final agreement to be negotiated and in final form based on a form acceptable to the city attorney. Obviously, we speak with staff and we confirm that all other terms, non-monetary terms, are acceptable to the city, but council holds the purse string, so we want to make sure you're comfortable with that purchase price of $850,000 plus all closing costs. And I'm happy to answer any questions, and other members of staff who have participated as well can answer questions about the sale or the project or whatever council's pleasure.
Councilmember Lucarelli.
I move to authorize the purchase of Kitsap County tax parcel number 4650-011-001-0001 and authorize the mayor to execute all necessary documents to effectuate purchase.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Lucarelli, a second by Councilmember Clausen. So, as you know, we've been working on this purchase for probably almost 2 years, so I'm thankful that we're almost to the finish line. I know that the phase one is probably the last, and we're not expecting any concerns there. This is raw land that's never had any structures on it, and it's 20 acres. It's the first step. You know, we need to make road improvements on Sydney South, Sydney Avenue South, in particular into the Fireweed and Flower Meadows neighborhoods, but until we can't put sidewalks and make road improvements until we have someplace to take the stormwater, because when you put curb and gutter up, they make dams, and we need someplace for the water to go. So, Councilmember Rose Pepe?
So what are we looking at from a retention pond? How long would it take to get that?
This is, we don't even have those design dollars.
Not on the radar screen
It's not
yet.
on the radar, you know.
Okay.
Buying this piece, we thought possibly that carrying these dollars into the next budget. Matter of fact, they were part of the next budget. So we're thankful that we finally got some movement and we've got this closed. I know we've got some in-house concepts that we've done, and there should be a remnant of property for a nice park out in that area too.
Good.
It's all done. So,
Nice.
but it's probably at least 2 years away before we start any design work and you know, building infrastructure out there.
Thank you, Mayor.
Other questions?
When will the phase one report be back, you know?
In 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, and there's a contingency within the PSA for that in case we needed it. Not that we're expecting anything, but
Yeah. That would cause us to pause if we found something on the phase one. Yeah, we'd already had it appraised. That's how we came to value. We've just been back and forth. There's been a boundary line adjustment associated with it too. This parcel went across the stream towards Bravo Terrace and along Sedgwick. We didn't need that property. They own the property over there too, so it made sense that they retain the property on one side of the stream and we retain the property on the other side of the stream. So that's part of what's drug this out a little bit. Other questions? Councilman?
Charlie, so the price ceiling on the property value itself is set at $850,000?
Correct. And then as the buyer, we're covering all closing costs. That's part of the
All right,
negotiation.
thank you.
Title escrow, we've got our phase one, other recording costs and such. Any other questions? All right, you'll be voting on the approval, oh, no, we're not. We're voting on the resolution authorizing the purchase of real property for stormwater facilities. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Hearing none, the resolution passes. We're on to item C, approval of an amendment to the letter of agreement with the Teamsters Local 589 regarding limited term assignments, non-union work. Ms. Lund, this is you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. In June of 2022, the City Council approved a letter of agreement with Teamsters Local 589 to allow a part-time court clerk to work an additional 20 hours in a non-union assignment in the Community Development Department. This employee has helped Community Development catch up on a backlog of work, and simultaneously the activity of the municipal court is increasing. Due to the increased activity in the court has requested that their employee increase her hours in the court, thereby decreasing her hours in DCD or Community Development. Community Development has agreed to decrease the hours for the remainder of the calendar year. The proposed amendment to the letter of agreement with the union has been sent to you under privilege from the city attorney, and that document would authorize the change in the allocated hours.
Councilmember Trenary.
I move to authorize the mayor to sign an amendment to the letter of agreement with Teamsters Local 589, representing municipal court employees relating to the hours worked during a limited term assignment.
Second.
Got a motion by Councilmember Trenary, a second by Councilmember Clausen. Have any questions for Ms. Lund? And then the proposed budget, actually, this agreement goes away at the end of the year, and this employee will be back in the court full-time, and then the budget proposes that Nick hires his own part-time employee. Okay, well, with no questions, you'll be voting on the approval of an amendment to the letter of agreement with the Teamsters Union regarding limited assignment non-union work. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the agreement has passed. We're at item D, approval of a road closure for a special event, Chimes and Lights. Ms. Wallet?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor, Council. City staff received a special event application for the Festival of Chimes and Lights scheduled for Saturday, December 3rd, 2022. As you may know, the application is sponsored by the City of Port Orchard and will be held downtown State Route 166 Bay Street from Kitsap to Sydney, around City Hall, the Port of Bremerton gazebo area. Some other road closures that we're proposing is Frederick Avenue, Robert Geiger, parking lot closures 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is from Kitsap Bank parking lot all the way to the gazebo managed by the Port of Bremerton. Again, this event is scheduled for Saturday, December 3rd. Setup starts at 1 p.m., is open to the public at 3 p.m. and until 7:30 p.m. Teardown will be completed by 8 p.m. Pursuant to Port Orchard Municipal Code 5.94.050, subsection 4, staff shall bring forward the special event application to the City Council for approval when the event requires a street or highway closure. In addition, we are required to put in a public notice pursuant to Port Orchard Municipal Code 5.96.050, subsection 3, which allows the citizens to provide written comments regarding how this special event could impact their property, business, and quality of life. That notice has been published, and as of to date, the city staff has not received any comments or concerns regarding this event taking place downtown. Lastly, staff and outside agencies have reviewed the application and are working towards ensuring safety measures are in place. Therefore, staff does recommend the council approve this application as presented and upon the event meeting the required and necessary public safety and traffic control provisions.
Member Clausen.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the road closure identified in the application for the Festival of Chimes and Lights event taking place on Saturday, December 3rd, 2022, as presented.
Second.
By Councilmember Clausen, a second by Councilmember Lucarelli. Are any questions on this? Go ahead.
No,
Councilmember. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. No, my comment was just, first of all, where's the year gone? And second of all, thanks to Cindy for all her work on Chimes and Lights and getting this going, because I know there's a lot of buzz. It came up at the POPSA meeting the other day. There's a lot of buzz about it already, so that's good.
Great.
Special thanks to staff as well.
Councilmember Chang.
Can you tell me a little more about the notice, where it was published?
We publish them on our city website. We also have a handful of members of the public that want to be on our press release, public notice distribution list. We publish them there, which also includes the
Thank you. I heard from one merchant that I happened to ask, and she was not aware of it, and I didn't know. She must not be on any of the email lists. But she indicated that she might close her store that day. So I was concerned why she hadn't heard about it. So
And we are opening, we are delaying the closure of the road to a little bit later this year.
The 1 p.m.?
Accommodate some of those businesses to allow them to stay open a little bit later. Hoping that was a good compromise from event and the businesses downtown.
We spent quite some time actually talking about that, Fred, and we were starting the event later so that business owners would have the opportunity to have shoppers come through their stores.
In the morning.
Yes. And into the afternoon, actually, because even though there'll be some closures starting early, shoppers will still be there up, till 3 and beyond.
Okay, so it's not closing at 1, it's sort of closing at 3. Okay, okay. I will let them know. Okay.
Other questions?
And then just one more point to make that's a change from previous years to this year is that although lot 3 and 4 are closed, we are only closing Harrison at the end of the lot. So that way the businesses that are on Harrison can be open and have additional parking for patrons downtown as well.
But then they would have to make an illegal left turn to get out of there. Right turn's closed.
Right, no,
No, they can turn
it's
right.
open all the way down to
They can come
Sydney.
through.
Okay. All right. Never mind. Other questions? All right, you'll be voting on the approval of a road closure for a special event, Festival of Chimes and Lights. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
One opposed? Hearing none, the event, road closure has been approved. We're to item E, approval of the October 11th, 2022 City Council meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve? Go ahead.
Mayor, motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
By Councilmember Rosa Pepe, a second by Councilmember Clausen.
No,
Chardy, the other C. Where I was going next was, I'll have
Yes.
abstentions by Councilmember Clausen and Councilmember Diener. My mind just wasn't working with my tongue. So, all right. Any corrections to the minutes? All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And 2 abstentions. All right, we're to item F, the official newspaper. Ms. Wallace?
I'm happy to take this
Actually,
one as well. Yeah.
Ms. Archer, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Mayor, Council, before you this evening is a resolution designating the Kitsap Sun as your official newspaper and repealing Resolution 070-22, whereby you establish the Port Orchard Independent as your official newspaper for the calendar year. The context for this request is that in order to qualify as your designated official newspaper, the paper needs to publish in hard copy, in writing, at least weekly. And we understand, we received notice from the Port Orchard Independent that they are not publishing weekly in the month of November. One of the weeks of the month of November, they will be exclusively online and or not publishing at all. As a result, that means that they are no longer qualified to serve as your official newspaper, and they cannot meet your staff's needs for timely notification of hearings, which is particularly sensitive this time of year for your finance department, as we are quickly noticing all of the elements of the budget process. The recommendation, therefore, is that the council waive the procurement requirements and declare that Kitsap Sun is the lowest bidder and a sole source for this service. Staff have confirmed that there are no other papers of general circulation that would meet your needs in the city to serve this as your official newspaper, as the Kitsap Sun and the Port Orchard Independent are the only 2 papers that bid this cycle for your official newspaper. The Kitsap Sun has indicated that they will honor their bid submission from earlier this year and utilize those rates. So the action before you is a resolution designating the Kitsap Sun as your official newspaper, repealing the previous designation of the Port Orchard Independent, and waiving the procurement requirements consistent with the sole source regulations. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councilmember Gucciardi.
Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution declaring Kitsap Sun as the city's official newspaper and repealing resolution number 070-22.
Second it.
Motion by Councilmember Gucciardi, a second by Councilmember Clausen. Any questions of Ms. Archer? Councilmember Diener?
Do we know why the Port Orchard Independent is not publishing that week?
We do not. Veterans Day.
Is on a Friday. But Veterans Day's on a Friday this year, and that's usually the day they publish.
They couldn't do it on Thursday?
I don't work for them.
Apparently not. Okay. Any other questions? It has been problematic with the weekly publication, so it's unfortunate, but it's also some logistical challenges we've been dealing with for a number of months.
Continues to be one of our items, isn't it, Mayor, for the legislature?
Yes, it is. It's on, matter of fact, it's on the legislative agenda, it always is. But, all right, you'll be voting on changing our official newspaper. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it passes unanimously. We're on to business item G, which was previously consent item F, which is the adoption of a resolution approving an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation for Title VI requirements. Do you need Tony to read the staff report?
I'll take it, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council. Recipients of federal financial assistance are required to comply with Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and subsequent non-discrimination laws. On December 17th, 2019, Port Orchard City Council approved C058-19 authorizing a non-discrimination agreement between the City of Port Orchard and the Washington State Department of Transportation. On October 6, 2022, the Port Orchard City Clerk's Office was contacted by the Washington State Department of Transportation Title VI Program Specialist requesting additional documentation due to an update in the local agency guidelines manual. Port Orchard Public Works Department determined that the city can fulfill the Title VI requirements by authorizing and adopting Washington State Department of Transportation's letter of intent to comply with the Washington State Department of Transportation's Title VI plan in lieu of adopting its own Title VI plan. Staff is seeking general authority for the mayor to execute the letter of intent, as well as any associated agreements and documents pertaining to the city's compliance with Title VI. Staff recommends that City Council adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to sign an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation adopting WashDOT's Title VI plan.
Lawson.
Mayor, I move to adopt a resolution authorizing the mayor to sign an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation adopting WashDOT's Title VI plan.
Seconded.
Motion by Councilmember Clausen, a second by Councilmember Terneri. The burning question is whether or not you want Councilmember Chang to recuse himself since he is an employee of the Washington State Department of
I
Transportation.
realize there's no fiscal impact, and I really wondered if I needed to remove myself because there's no financial impact. However, I think for appearance of fairness, if anybody wanted to object, I should give them that opportunity.
Okay. Is there anyone wishing for Councilmember Chang to
No.
recuse himself?
No, you're not that lucky.
But if he keeps it
All
up.
right. I see no one asking him to recuse himself, so I will call for the vote, and you'll be voting on the adoption voting on a resolution approving an agreement with the Washington State Department of Transportation for Title VI requirements. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, the resolution passes. So I know a couple council members recently took AWC training on social media. So we've got a timely discussion item tonight. Our city attorney is going to give us a little presentation on social media, do's and don'ts, maybe.
Thank you.
So take it away, Ms. Archer.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, as the mayor introduced, we're going to have a quick conversation and discussion regarding social media policies that the city has and social media use by elected officials and employees at the city. I do take my position as facilitator of this conversation seriously, so if there are questions, please interrupt, and let's definitely approach this as a discussion item, which is what it's labeled as. So I have a PowerPoint. I can't load it on my computer, apologies, but you should each have a copy, so if we want to just, in the interest of time, I think Brandy's loading it, but we can jump right in. So the existing city policies, as far as I understand them to be, there's a social media policy that applies specific to the police department, and then there's a social media policy that is embedded in the city's personnel policies and procedures manual that governs all employees, inclusive of the police department. The police department's policy, just to call it a few unique aspects or a few specific aspects, only authorized users are allowed to post on social media on behalf of the organization. The content of those posts is controlled by the agency. Content is vetted through the chief and through supervisory staff before it is posted. It prohibits public posting and comments. So that means commenting is deactivated on social media posts by the police department. And we'll touch on why that's important in a minute. It is supervised, meaning that a member of staff is monitoring what is occurring on the social media to the extent we have the resources available. And then the policy contains provisions related to records retention and training as to pitfalls when it comes to social media, some of which we'll touch on. So because it's based in policy and because it's a post on behalf of the city, records retention concepts apply, and the policy is robust as to those records retention requirements. Similarly, the city's personnel policies and procedures, only authorized users may post onto city maintained and sponsored social media accounts. And the city has a social media coordinator who is the public records officer, since those are so intertwined. The accounts are, again, controlled, and access to the accounts are controlled. And public posting and commenting is also turned off as to city-sponsored posts for the same reasons we'll describe in a few moments. And again, this is also in the police department's policy, but important to stress, equal access is preserved, meaning we are providing an equal forum for all who participate, all who can access the social media account and postings. And ensuring that equal access is preserved is also important under those policies. I want to take a moment here and note that there is no current policy that governs council's social media use. Some cities have adopted council-specific social media policies. It's the purview of the council to police itself in this arena. So if this council were interested in adopting a social media policy, I'm happy to assist with that. I have done so in other agencies. And it can be useful for many of the reasons we're about to discuss. All right, next slide.
Quick question for you, Charlie.
Absolutely.
I understand that the police department has an Instagram account that does not allow comments. I've seen that. And so for the city, are you talking about the city's Port Orchard page that is not supposed to allow comments?
Per the policy, it's not supposed to allow comments. Are comments currently active? Is that what you're indicating?
Yeah.
Okay, so we can talk about
okay.
that, yeah.
Sounds like we have a setting wrong.
Well, I think we may need to adjust your policy, but we can talk about the pitfalls with comments in a moment. It is something where if we have, if the city has adopted a policy, well, if the city has adopted a practice to allow for comments, I can just jump ahead. And comments have been activated. What's been created is referred to as a limited public forum under the free speech constitutional rights doctrines. So we are allowed to allow for comments as an agency and provide that forum. And so if we have done so in certain aspects, we are allowed to enable that. It does place a substantial burden on staff, which is one of the reasons we often turn off comments. So one of the reasons is it places a huge burden on staff to monitor and to monitor those comments. So if someone were to use those comment fields to say, hey, there's a pothole that my car just fell into and it poses a public danger, and no one is monitoring that comment and we don't see it, and something more tragic were to happen, we would be considered to have been on notice. Using the more appropriate channels to notify us of emergency conditions, i.e. 911, funneling comments in that direction is usually preferable, and turning off those limited fora that can create the appearance of a way to communicate with an agency when in fact it isn't a way to communicate because it's not able to be monitored is one of the risks of utilizing comments. Another is records retention, and again we'll talk about that a bit more in the next moment. Associated with retaining the comments, sometimes comments are posted and then deleted. Ensuring that we have adequate staff to monitor comments and retain them is another burden, but I know staff are doing that as it relates to the current practice. And then the third has to do with content control. If we've created a little limited public forum, we are unable to delete. We are unable to police. So we have to allow anyone to say absolutely anything, which can, as we all know, have substantial problems. So I'm touching on what we're going to talk about in more depth, but these are reasons why we tend to turn off comments and we don't allow for comments under your policy. And we'll audit what's going on and ensure that what we're discussing tonight, it reflects our practices. Was there another question? Yes, absolutely.
Just a quick question. Assuming that we have allowed this to occur, that I'm assuming also that we can elect to turn that off at any time.
Correct, yes. There's a recent case that confirms that a limited public forum can be turned off. Yeah. We have to turn it off as to everyone, though. We couldn't pick and choose, yeah. All right, so I gave you a preview of the big topics we're going to talk about, but this is sort of a list of, back one, sorry. This is a list of the key legal issues that arise when we talk about social media use. When is social media personal and when does it become part of your city business? What are your obligations under the Public Records Act as far as retention and production? Communication with the public. When are we communicating with the public in a way that creates an obligation for action? The free speech public forum issues, and then lastly, use of public facilities, PDC concerns as well for the city. So first, when is use of social media transition from a personal approach to a professional in the context of your city business? Recently, the court issued a decision in West versus City of Puyallup, this is from 2018, where the court confirmed that a public official's posts on a personal Facebook page can constitute agency public records subject to disclosure if the posts relate to the conduct of government and are prepared within the public official's scope of employment or official capacity. So that is a big, meaty sentence, and that case presents somewhat of a test that you can live by, but it remains a gray area that is analyzed on a case-by-case basis. So a lot of the discussion that I'm presenting this evening takes a very conservative approach, because in public records, I tend to take a very conservative approach and side with the fact that anything and everything you touch could be a public record. I don't like to get into those battles because they are very often something that the city can lose and lose substantially. So I take that perspective as to public records, and this conversation will be based from that perspective. So in the West case, the facts cited with the documents at issue being considered to be part of a personal Facebook page as opposed to a professional Facebook page. A city council woman was not required to post to Facebook as part of her job, which none of you are. She also, however, she did not associate her page in any way with her role as a councilwoman. And what does that mean, to associate your page? So does your biography or does your bio section of your Facebook account reference the city of Port Orchard in any way? Are there any links between a personal page and the city's page? Do you reference in your comments as a council member, I think as follows? Do you disclose information gained in your capacity as a council member through social media postings? And important to this case, the council member did not disclose anything that wasn't very, very public to begin with. She was only posting agendas. She was only posting notice of meetings. She was not posting anything related to city business that would otherwise not necessarily be readily available to the public. Those are some key distinctions, obviously a very big gray area, but just know, there has to be a lot of caution taken when you consider taking information that you learned in your capacity as a council member and putting it on your personal social media account, because that can create a nexus between your role here with the city and your personal account, such that now all postings are related to city business and have implications, as we're going to talk about, for public records retention. If someone were to comment on your personal social media page and say, council member, what are you going to do about X? If you responded by saying, here's what I plan to do about X, does the court consider that to have now transformed your personal account into a professional account? And that posting in particular, a posting related to city business? In my opinion, yes. And there's, obviously a large gray area there as well, but I think some of the tools you can use to limit and kind of stay in the same area as the West versus Puyallup case, disclaiming on every post, this is in my personal opinion, having a disclaimer at the top of the page, this is my personal account, not responding to comments where it's based on citizen outreach issues or citizens asking or directing them to a different page. Trying to use tools to really minimize the nexus between your role as a council member and your personal social media page. Obviously, this isn't workable for the majority of people, but staying off social media entirely is the least legally risky, so I always encourage that. But as you try to utilize that as a tool for public outreach, using disclaimers, using tools to separate your personal from your professional, are ways in which to limit that nexus. But it's reasonable to, from a starting position, to think, if I am discussing city business on my personal social media account and I do not have adequate disclaimers in place, there's a risk that I have now made my personal account a professional account that's subject to public records. So that it's as clear as mud. It remains as clear as mud for the majority of folks. But those are some of the tools we can take away, some of the tips we can take away from the West decision. Yeah.
You may touch on this later, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So if I'm out there doing all these things, how does that implicate the city?
So if you were to be utilizing a personal social media account and there to be a nexus with the city, the postings on that account will now be considered public records. And so if Brandy were to learn about a public records request that was related to a topic that you've been posting on social media about, she did an email blast for responsive records, and you did not provide the postings from your personal social media account that were responsive to that request, then liability falls both on the city and on you personally. And note that the city does not have insurance coverage for public records litigation. So
You can all remember should remember the Bainbridge Island case was a significant award.
right. The costs associated with public records litigation continue to rise. Yeah, absolutely.
Charlie, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, let's say that you shared a post from the city's Port Orchard page, so it was controlled content. You're sharing it to a group, and you're not adding any comments. If people then comment on that share, is the city supposed to provide records of every comment on a share in a group that's not owned by the city?
Well, I mean, that's pretty fact specific, but I would say taking a conservative approach, if it were a post Well, let's start at the end. So if you were to engage in the comment section and you were to provide information that was not otherwise in the subject posting, then absolutely, that would now transform that whole conversation to a public record that would need to be retained. A step back from that, if your conversation was merely about, hey, do you want to attend this meeting that I've just shared the posting about? We get into more of a gray area. It's a spectrum, right? I think it is obviously important for you to share information with members of the public. And in the West case, the council member was sharing information about meetings that were occurring. But you know, if you go further and you add to that conversation or you identify yourself as a council person in the posting itself, then you push it more into the gray area. Honestly, I think one of the successful approaches that I've seen with King County Council people, other electeds who are pushing out information at a high volume, is to utilize the social media's elected official page feature and have an elected official page. That does have huge ramifications for public records, because that then means that page is a city page that the staff have to be monitoring. But if you felt it was so necessary, that's one of the protective ways, and then really isolate your personal page completely separate from that. Try to answer that. I mean, it's a spectrum answer. So
If I share something, I take a screenshot of just the share, me sharing the post to a group, and I email myself the screenshot of that share. So there would be a record if someone asked, like, how many.
well, no, the metadata issue still pops up with social media. So a screenshot will not potentially be sufficient.
Well, usually metadata is with email, but not with a Facebook post.
No, I've seen metadata requests as to text messages, everything. Yeah. People are asking for metadata, yes, to police
So
videos.
we'd have to go to Facebook to get the metadata, or how would we get the metadata?
Yes, and it's arduous. Yes. So I've listed a couple questions on this slide that you can sort of internalize to ask yourself when considering, you know, is this personal or is this business? Is it linked to me in any way? Is it linked to the city in any way? Is the question being posed to me in my capacity as a council member or merely as a neighbor? And is the message that I am conveying in any way to the benefit of the city? In the West case, the court said that the benefit to the city derived from a council member merely sharing the dates of a meeting was minimal. But if the council member is providing information that further benefits the city and its messaging, then that shifts us more closely to it's a business account as opposed to a personal. So the West case presented sort of an absolute best case scenario where a council member was literally just sharing meeting notices. Honestly, we cannot predict where, as we shift away from that and we shift to more substantive postings, where that line is drawn by the court. But in my experience with this court in particular, they tend to favor that things are public record.
Shardy.
Question, have any cities gone down the road of creating policies that just don't allow for, I mean, there's so much gray area there, right? That they just create policies that council members just flat can't do it, to the point where they, as an individual, would indemnify the city if they were to do something. And I mean, you know, from a city trying to protect itself,
Right.
you know, has anybody gone down that road to say, you know, I can't control what you do, but, you know, this is our policy, and if you violate policy, there's indemnification there back to the city?
That's a really interesting question. I'm not aware of any policies that were adopted by a legislative body prohibiting the use of social media, nor am I aware of any policies that require individual electeds to indemnify the city for personal social media conduct. In my experience, this is an issue that is hotly debated when it comes up for councils and as they grapple with the policies.
Well, insurance for litigation, holy smokes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And to the individual.
Right,
Personal
exactly.
liabilities, like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
I would like to just take a little bit of a tangent from Sean here, is if we had a policy that says if you're going to do it, this is the only way that you can do it acceptably, and if an individual council member deviates from that, does that provide any protection to the city?
I think it would, yes. So if the policy had very specific guidelines as to disclaimers to be used, as to subject matters to avoid, as to tools to be utilized, and if there were a deviation, then as far as the indemnification you get as a member of the council for your actions acting within the course and scope, if it's in violation of the law or in violation of policy, then the city has an argument to disclaim providing you with that defense. It's important to note, however, that the city will also still usually be sued. So we will always still be brought into those litigations.
I've always understood that you can sue a ham sandwich if you want.
Absolutely.
You give some level of protection.
Exactly,
if you
yes,
will.
yes.
No, I just wanted to bring up that we still have to be aware of the individual's right for free speech and making that, where we're trying to make this possible break between what you can do as a council member and what you can do as an individual. We still have rights on our social media pages as long as we're notifying the public that this is our personal role and that there's any city business, contact my account on city business with a disclaimer, which I agree, John, that
That's what I'm
may be
hearing
the way
you
to go.
say, is
Right.
that you can do what you want as an
Stripes in the road.
individual.
Right.
But when you start representing the city in some form or another, now you've crossed that line from
Right.
being personal to.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to make it
exposing the city.
so airtight where we try to stifle anybody's right
Well, I
for
think
free
that was
speech.
Sean's comments about just flat restricting it. I don't know that we could get away with doing that, but you could certainly, I would assume, you could restrict any discussion about city business or any of these things that might cross the line from personal to.
Yeah, and I know from email page, personal email, I'd love to have a disclaimer to throw in my personal email. So, that's always there under my name, so.
That one's easy. You just CC your mailbox here at the city with all your responses.
I think that would especially come up in election years. When people are asking, what have you done, or what connection do you have? And that would be very tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. That one of the leading cases in this area comes out of the Midwest, and a council member who had an elected official, I think it was a state legislator, had linked their campaign website to their personal website, which then was linked to the city. And so is the campaign website, I mean, it can become this web of problematic issues from, in our state, PDC violations all the way to public records retention issues. In that case, it was about constitutional rights because the woman was blocking citizens from commenting or deleting things she didn't agree with. So, and we'll talk about that in one
Instead of
moment.
an auto response though, that just automatically emails it back and says, if this is related to the city, here's my email you need. I can't do it over personal email, and then everyone would get an auto response. So you're being respectful and.
All right, a couple more topics, and we've touched on some of these, so I can breeze through them, but just a reminder as to public records retention, as we've talked about. So social media presents a challenge as to public records retention, and public records constitutes any writing containing any information related to the conduct of government, prepared, owned, used, or retained in your capacity as a representative of the agency. So the courts take a very expansive view of what constitutes a public record. And so social media postings absolutely fit the bill. Even Zoom chat features fit the bill. All of the various message boards that we can utilize fit the bill. Tweets. Sorry. Thank you. Twitter. I was trying to say Twitter and tweets at the same time. Tweeter twits. Excuse me. Tweets. But there's so many new. If you're into TikTok, those short videos, those would absolutely constitute public records to the extent you're doing a TikTok about the next public works project. So all of these things are public records, and it is important that if you are venturing into the gray area that is linking your personal with your professional, what will happen is if Brandy were to get a public records request that implicates a specific broad topic, then you will be asked to execute what's referred to as an affidavit that you have searched your personal social media and you have confirmed that there are no responsive records located in your social media. Worst case scenario, if we were to then have to litigate that issue, a judge could be looking at your personal social media account. So by linking them, you have now potentially made your personal devices and your personal accounts potentially public in the sense that a judge could one day look at those. So this, I want to, yes, absolutely.
You can go ahead and finish what you were just.
No, I wanted to scare you, so that was why.
I forgot what I was going to say. No. So in the event where you have a council member who is fudging that line or maybe even crossing that line, you had mentioned earlier that there's some potential liability of both the city and that individual, and that could be expensive for lack of representation. But does that suggest that the city has some sort of oversight role or preemptive role when it comes to that council member, for example, and how would they manage to be able to even know when those lines are being crossed?
So that's a great question. I would say as to the Public Records Act, yes, the city has a obligation to ensure that there are policies and practices in place that govern and meet the obligations of the city. And your current public records policies apply to you as elected officials of the city. So you are currently governed by those rules and regulations. However, as a council member, enforcement as to those rules and regulations is a bit different. You are elected officials, and we can't discipline you for violating the public records policies and procedures. So your question injects a lot of legal risk analysis that I don't necessarily want to discuss in an open meeting, but you are obligated to, just as any employee would be obligated to comply with the Public Records Act. I will note that there are substantial ramifications built into the act that should internally motivate you. So as a public a member of the government that has potential public records in a social media account, you should be concerned that if you were to destroy those, you could be charged with a misdemeanor. Actually, I believe it's a felony, and a substantial monetary fine. And destruction, meaning if you don't have your retention settings set appropriately, so things are auto-deleting, that can be considered a retention violation. So if you're, this is a bit different than social media, but if you text message, for example, on a personal cell phone related to city business, and you don't have your retention settings properly, so it's auto-deleting, that's a retention violation, and that could be potentially seen as an intentional destruction of records that can pose personal liability to you and to the city.
What about transitory records?
Transitory records are not public records, but transitory records, and I don't know if we've ever done a training at this city on transitory records. I'm happy to do a training specific to that, because in order for you to be authorized to be deleting transitory records, you have to really understand what they are. And transitory records are records that have no retention value. So I'll see you in 5 minutes. Could you bring that pizza to the party? Those sorts of things. But I think sometimes people stretch the understanding of what it means to be transitory. So that's a great edit point to the conversation.
Seen an uptick of just legal firms that are out proactively searching for this stuff. I mean, these trends happen across a myriad of things where they're looking for that gotcha moment. I mean, is there an uptick in these types of claims?
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that you've lost your insurance on this point. There's no firms that will provide insurance to public agencies on this topic any longer. Yeah, well, I'm aware of at least one individual who made approximately $600,000 in 1 year.
So to Councilmember Diener's question too, it's you're the body that polices each other as far as what's appropriate activity and what's inappropriate activity. And we've seen most recently in Bremerton where a council member was out of line and they were censured by their fellow council members. So there are ways that you discipline yourselves, but it's not my role or staff's role to do that.
Sure. I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but I suspect many of us don't engage in social media to be able to, check out perhaps what Fred is doing, as an example.
I have a tough time spelling it, let alone engaging it.
All right, next
We're
slide.
issued a device for a reason. Let's use them.
So the next big legal issue that pops up with the use of social media, I hinted at this one earlier as well, is if you were to be notified of issues and what reporting requirements you had had. And I used the pothole example. So if someone were to notify you of an emergency condition via a social media account that was attached to or linked in any way to the city could then be inferred to have had notice of the dangerous condition, which has ramifications in the tort realm and in as to our legal risks associated with that condition. We are responsible for the things we know about. So this is one of the other pitfalls that can arise if you have social media and you are using it actively as a council member and you are not immediately reporting forward whatever it is you're learning. That can be a risk point. And again, taking a very conservative approach, if the forum isn't available to the public to report to you, they're using preferable channels, including 911. Couple other very brief moments in time when communication with the public via social media presents some legal issues. Quasi-judicial proceedings where you're sitting in a quasi-judicial position deciding on a particular permit, we have to disclose any communications you've had related to the topic as part of the quasi-judicial proceeding. And that could include very embarrassing Twitter exchanges. That can include anything related to the project. So you will be obligated to do so in order for the appearance of fairness doctrine to be met. So again, from a conservative approach, if those conversations aren't occurring, you do not have to notify us. Federally funded projects often come with restrictions as to communications with individuals involved with the project. So for example, if you were doing a federally funded transportation project that required the acquisition of property, communication with potential sellers of property, you would be restricted under your federal funding guidelines from having communications of any kind with individuals about the project. And communication via social media would be another area of potential pitfall in that arena. Next slide, please. So free speech, public forum issues are huge. I'm going to touch very briefly on them in the interest of getting us out of here this evening on time. Banning users and removing comments on posts are two of the areas in which legal issues and litigation arises most frequently. So again, the context of this, you have somehow linked your personal account to a professional account, or you have a professional account where you regularly post about city business. If you were to ban users from that account, the Davison v. Randall case tells us that you may have unintentionally, but perhaps intentionally, created a constitutional free speech claim by the person who was being banned, because as a member of a public agency, you may have created a limited public forum or even a public forum without the limitation. And by banning someone, it's essentially kicking someone out of a town square and saying, I don't want to hear what you have to say. And so there can be litigation, constitutional rights violation litigation arising from that. Similarly, removing comments or posts. There is some litigation that supports an agency's ability to remove comments that are quote unquote off topic. That to me is an enormous legal gray area, and giving discretion to determine what is on topic can itself create problems. So anytime you choose to ban anytime you choose to remove a comment on a post, a potential constitutional rights violation can occur. So removal of comments would have to be viewpoint neutral to survive the scrutiny of a free speech claim, which requires time, place, and manner analysis. So you would have to be somehow able to remove all comments on a viewpoint neutral basis that were off topic, and they couldn't be, you didn't like what this person was saying about the topic, but you did like what this person was saying. Obviously, that's a very challenging litmus to apply. So again, here, removing comments is absolutely ripe with potential legal risk arising from use of social media. Next slide, please. And finally, this is very briefly, there is some PDC decisions in Washington that indicate that the prohibition that applies to the use of public facilities to assist in campaigns or to further any sort of specific ballot propositions would extend to facility resources, including websites, including online media. So there can be a potential PDC violation by the city, by a particular actor, by linking and by utilizing a personal social media account that has been linked to a city for any sort of campaign purposes. So this is just another very brief one I wanted to touch on.
Councilor Cacciardi?
So liken this subject back to staff, right? Because we got policy there, but they also could, I guess, conduct kind of city business on it, right? So in that event, does EPL cover that? Is there insurance, is there a different insurance provision because they're an employee in the event of a claim?
So your policy, excuse me, the personnel policy that would apply to them discourages and prohibits them from conducting city business on a personal social media account. We cannot, as Councilmember Rosebebe pointed out, we cannot restrict free speech rights of our employees. So if an employee were to go on a personal page and violate that policy by posting some sort of social media post about city business, if it were based on their opinion and not disclosing confidential information they gained as their part of their employment, we would be in sort of a gray area as to whether or not we would be able to do anything about it, because it would be their
Right,
exercising their
but
free
if they
speech.
did something that was a legitimate claim and a claim was brought forward,
Yeah.
would EPL cover that for the city?
I'm not sure. I would think so, but they would be in violation of the policy. So potentially we would be able to disclaim having to provide them with a defense. And then the city may be able to get out on summary judgment based on it being outside the scope of the job. So, yeah. So happy to facilitate any questions. We kind of, again, had that dialogue, which is very helpful. But my email, phone, always open for questions like this. I'm here during the day on council meeting days, happy to meet with you to discuss separately as well. Yeah.
I'm, only because I'm not completely familiar with it, but I am nervous based on what we're hearing, and I would certainly like to have more discussion
Yeah,
about a council
I
policy.
agree.
You had mentioned that early on about happy to facilitate the discussion and/or draft something for us, and I, for one, would welcome that.
Yeah, I'd like to second that and see what our exposure looks like currently.
Appropriate for
Yeah,
risk
absolutely.
management in the city.
So why don't you take and give us a draft policy that we would bring back? I'm not sure what November's work study looks like. We don't have one in December, but we definitely could bring it back in January.
I think there are policy decision points that would guide a potential policy, because I've drafted them, but they've been a wide variety of approaches.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's a committee this fits neatly into that I could meet with, or an ad hoc committee. I don't know what the council's pleasure is, but I'm happy to.
Committee you'd want to sign that to?
Mark, do you want on your committee?
It's not economic development.
Well, it could be if
We
we're
could hear it
avoiding
in
risk.
finance.
We
It's
could
tied
make
to
it
risk
on
management.
It's
Finance,
tied to
yeah.
risk management, so we could. So you can bring.
Sorry, Noah.
It'll be after budget.
Absolutely. Yeah, it
First of
doesn't
the
have
year.
to happen next
Right.
month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
first of the year.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to council committee reports. Economic Development Tourism, you met last week, I think.
We did.
You have a report. What'd you guys meet about? What'd you talk about?
Social media policies.
No?
Well, let's see here. We had Visit Kitsap in, Beth Javins, I think is how you pronounce her name. She talked with us and presented on the past year's hotel and B&B activity in Kitsap. She gave some great information. Unfortunately, in my opinion, I thought it wasn't specific enough to Port Orchard and or South Kitsap. It was more of a general Kitsap County wide data that she was providing us. That is available for extra money, of course. She can drill down and bring us more Port Orchard specific data. We also were looking at perhaps some changes in the structure of the traffic impact fees to potentially include zones or districts. We discussed this a little bit.
We talked about some of that was really related to some of the challenges we're facing with downtown redevelopment and parking and whether or not we could create zones, and we might consider that at a future update to our when we look at our traffic impact fee model, because the downtown street is built out and it's not going to get widened or really improved with traffic impact fees for capacity.
And then the final thing we really discussed, Visit Kitsap took up a majority of our time, but the final thing we discussed was basically whether we want to do a hybrid type of a meeting, stick with Zoom, go back to in-person, and we determined we were going to stick with Zoom. It just met the needs of the majority much more clearly than any type of a hybrid meeting. That was about it.
Okay, thanks for your report. Utilities didn't meet this month. Finance gave its report last week at the work study. I remember that. Transportation, you met tonight.
Oh, yes. There was a lot of information. Chris presented a preview of the pavement management program that we will be seeing in November. And we got into technical things like crack sealer, chip seal, and grind outs. And it's like, that was, I wouldn't say it went over my head, but I can't summarize it in a coherent fashion. We also went through his presentation to Kitsap County for non-motorized projects. These are things that sort of bike lanes that he wants to do in the city and sort of encourage the county to continue, such as not Bethel, but Lund. And apparently the county has done certain things on Lund in the UGA next to their roundabout. Then there was a follow-up on Edgeline roads. He forwarded us a link from Port Townsend. And there was discussion on potential places that this could go. This is where we're painting the roads to sort of channel the traffic to allow for more non-motorized use of bike lanes sort of on the sides. It would be on streets with under 3,000 average daily trips, or ADTs, I think that's what it is. Do you have anything else to add?
Just that the edge line approach to non-motorized management is kind of new, at least in our area. Port Townsend, I think, was one of the first to implement that. So they've got some pilot projects, and it's going to require a fair amount of education of drivers as to how to pass bicyclists or walkers on these narrower, slower roads. And so that's always, I mean, you heard, I think, at one of our last meetings where somebody who said roundabouts are terrible. Well, it's a familiarity issue with how to manage those driving features that we'll have to get on top of.
Okay. Chimes and lights.
So we're moving along. Our meeting was pretty much firming up the schedule. And we're just working on the details of the pep parade, which we haven't had for a while, bringing that back. So mainly it's that kind of thing, the lighted boats. We're firming that up, confirming that. Even if the Sinclair Yacht Club isn't going to be managing that, the port is already going to be accepting reservations for the lighted boats to be in that area. So just details, looking at details.
When's the first day we can decorate the tree?
Let's see, it's coming up very soon. I think it's the 4th.
November.
I can confirm that. I don't have that materials with me.
Yeah, if you could just text me, since I have all the decorations for the council's tree.
And you know, if you go to the city website and go to tree decorating,
Yep.
it's on the form.
Okay, I'll check it there. Thank you.
All right. Land use, have you met?
Yeah, land use met last week. We talked about the parking at Perry Avenue North and how there's a difficult, and certainly would be difficult for emergency vehicle access. There was a number of people that attended in response to a mail out. I think there's still some work to be done what appeared to be the current favorite was sort of a checkerboard pattern on both sides of the street. So there was some questions and a little more work to be done on that. We also talked about subdivision entry signs, so the location of those, how many you can have per entrance to subdivisions. And then we talked about some annual housekeeping code, which included things like adding McCormick Village Overlay District to the established zones, increasing the number of townhomes in the R2 zone from 2 to 3 to 3 to 4, adding massage parlor as a personal service in the code, the narrowing of minimum right-of-way widths for streets that lead to cul-de-sacs, bike parking incentives, which is good, and also some change to wheel stops and sidewalk overhangs, some code that will sort of disincentivize lack of wheel stops where people can park up against sidewalks. And then we concluded the meeting with some discussion about temporary signage and easy permits for temporary signs. So think of the A boards or some of these signs that we see alongside the roads. I think there's a lot of work to be done on that because I think that helps to define character of a community a bit. So I know that there's maybe some strong feelings on that. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. And I know it's also going to the Planning Commission.
And it also includes political signs and non-political signs, or commercial signs.
Well, I guess I didn't hear that political signs were being proposed to be regulated.
It's commercial versus non-commercial.
Political signs are outside of that.
They would be allowed, but yeah. No.
Scott, may I just ask,
Non-commercial signs are political signs.
Oh, okay.
They fall into that category.
They fall into that category.
I think there was a question about a use, and somebody maybe argued whether it was
An office use
Yeah,
as opposed
right.
to personal
that's what it was
service.
not-
We had a code interpretation request from somebody who was trying to argue that it was allowed in a zone under, I don't remember if it was retail
It
or
was
something, but
office, yeah.
yeah, they wanted to consider it an office use rather than like a personal service, and so we're clearly defining it in our table, consistent with the interpretation.
okay. I'll breathe again.
Councilman Clausen.
Just a question. I know that the county has been talking, and you might know better than all of us, about putting in a requirement to provide EV chargers in developments and/or multifamily units. Has there been any discussion on the
Already in our
committee
code.
regard that?
Already in our code.
Is it already? I missed that. So, all right, I apologize. Thank you.
Year or more ago.
Had for breakfast, so forgive me.
I think you're doing meetings in person, too.
We're leading
Oh,
the
yeah.
charge.
So there was one more item. We talked about meeting preferences, and I happened to attend this one remotely, and it was not very pleasant. It was hard to hear what people were saying. I could hear, it was weird. You could hear people from the audience who were off camera better than you could some of the staff. So we agreed that, with the decision of doing it either all in person or remotely, the choice was to go remotely.
No, in person.
The takeaway from that is,
Unless
that
it's public,
microphone,
then it would be
you
in person.
can't
That's right.
turn, we've been dealing with it. You can't turn your head and talk this way and have the microphone pick you up. So the public were sitting over where Debbie is, talking towards the council, which is where the microphone is. Ian in particular was difficult to
was
hear
hard.
because he was over here at this screen pointing to the drawings and talking this direction. So you just have to be mindful where the microphone is when you get to.
And Jay points out that in the future, if we have these kinds of meetings where we've advertised the public to come and speak, then we'll be in person, obviously.
Yeah, and that was a meeting we had quite a few members of the public at.
How many did show up?
About 12.
Dozen, yeah. I
Okay.
would say
I
about a
tried to
dozen.
send you a
You
picture.
sent a picture, yeah.
We were talking about, we had a nuclear option, which was taking all the parking off the street. I mean, that probably got their attention.
That
And-
works.
And then we had a one-way street option, and option 3 was just kind of the status quo, but we're in areas where the street's too narrow to have two-car park. We're gonna have a checkerboard approach, we're gonna have some no parking zones, and it's just because an emergency vehicle needs to get through there from time to time, and if you've got 2 cars parked there, you can't even get a car past, so. All right, lodging tax, we're just waiting for this report. Go ahead.
Well, we met yesterday for 2 hours, and we heard from all of the applicants. They got to kind of present their cause. Once that was done, we went into starting to discuss kind of allocations. We made it about halfway through, but then we kind of reached our time limit. We had a couple committee members that had hard stops at 5 o'clock, and so we're not done with that process yet. We're in the midst of rescheduling our next session for either Monday or Tuesday of next week, and potentially after that meeting, we'll have the committee's recommendation to bring back before council, and I would assume that we would have final recommendations in advance of adopting the budget, in November. So that's kind of where we're at.
Okay, thank you for your report. Sewer Advisory Committee doesn't meet until November 5th.
It says in here City Hall, but hadn't we, didn't we say something about that being just a Zoom-only meeting? Do you recall?
I do not, but I can.
We just check on that? Yep. Okay, thank you. Yes, we verified that. It was a Zoom only, wasn't it? Yeah.
That's for the budget section of it?
Yes, all it is approval.
It was Zoom only, yeah.
Zoom only.
I'm suspecting that it was communicated to Janine, and since I'm the one that did the packet this week, it didn't get updated.
That's
so
fine, I
I
just
will
wanted to clarify.
get that done.
Okay, outside agencies, I have one. Housing Kitsap met today, and in the good of the order portion of the meeting, I spoke to the Permanent Supportive Housing, the lot that we would like to buy from Housing Kitsap. I've been talking to the executive director and their development director about it, and so I brought it up to the other board members. They were all very supportive. Threw a plug-in to the county commissioners who were there, and I said, it'll all be contingent upon us getting a grant from the county from their 1/10 measure, and I sure would like some love. And they threw it back at me. Well, we'd like it if you loved us back once in a while too. And I think it was a reference to Veterans Park. And I said noted. So anyway, after the first of the year, that grant window opens, and we'll definitely apply. That's kind of anyway. The board as a whole was very supportive. Thought it was creative. And it's really contingent on money now. So we are to the mayor's report, and it's quick, mostly. We've got the legislative agenda. I think 3 or 4 of you have signed up. If you haven't, you're missing out. November 30th at the Point Casino. Brandy would love to sign you up. Councilmember Terneri and I attended the Chamber of Commerce Awards Gala on Sunday evening. And Corrine Haydock Johnson was given the Citizen of the Year award. And we also were given a plaque for 30 years of membership at the City of Port Orchard with the Chamber of Commerce. So bring that back. Spent 2 hours this afternoon with senators and representatives from the state discussing AWC's proposal regarding missing middle housing. We talked about zoning, regulatory reform, funding from the state for infrastructure and affordable housing. It's a negotiation. We're trying to, and ultimately the legislature is going to do whatever they darn well please. So, but we're trying to give them ideas that would be supported by the cities. Nice job. I got a nice letter from the Port Orchard Yacht Club that are related to the derelict boats. And it says, to all those involved, on behalf of the Port Orchard Yacht Club and its members, I would like to express our sincere appreciation for the removal of the derelict boats in Sinclair Inlet over the past weekend. Not only does it give our members peace, it is also much more beautiful. Thank you for taking care of our community. And that's the good news. The bad news is we have 6 boats, and the bids we got were double what we have in the budget. So we're working with the State Department of Natural Resources on their process that will allow for us to get reimbursed up to 90% of the expenses. But we got to make sure that the piggy bank hasn't all been spent because they only reimbursed until the money runs out. Last thing, personnel policy changes. I need to report those to you. We recently reviewed the city clerk and the deputy city clerk's job descriptions and updated those. So that ends my mayor's report. We report to the department heads. Mr. Lang, what exciting things are going on in Public Works?
Nothing exciting, but to update you on Lippert, it was scheduled to be paved yesterday and today. There is a weather window tomorrow, so hopefully the first part of that paving project will commence tomorrow. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks for the update. Noah, what do you got?
Nothing real significant. Again, we have a couple meetings come up before we adopt the final budget. I have not heard any questions, but I just want to keep putting that out there for council. If you do have questions, we still have 3 more meetings that we can address those at. And then there are some minor adjustments we're going to make in the final budget. I disclosed some of it with the Transportation Committee today. There was a project tip number 1.5A for Old Clifton Road, non-motorized, that is currently in the 21-22 budget. And we wanted to have some additional spending authority in 23-24 to spill over because we didn't get to that work today. But we're anticipating it to come through in October, November. So there is going to be some minor adjustment for that project on transportation. Again, very minor. The other adjustment that we've made is the reduction in property tax revenue due to the exemption. So that's been factored into the budget. So just those 2 primary changes from our last preliminary budget. And again, I'll disclose all of the changes that take place from the preliminary to the final over the coming weeks, but those are the only 2 at this point that we've identified. And then the last thing, I don't know if you can come to this, Mayor, the Finance Committee, we meet November 15th. Do you want to continue to meet? I don't have anything at this point, unless we want to talk about our normal financials and then anything budget related. So I'm going to leave it open to you guys on November 15th, if we want to meet or not.
We can wait till November 8th and see if there's anything.
Certainly.
Just hold it in
Certainly.
place for right
Okay.
now.
Likely to be canceled, though, if we don't have it, because we can
Yeah, I
always
was gonna say.
email the financials out to you guys.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
If we don't have any agenda items, we'll can't likely cancel. Okay. Mr. Bond, do you have anything?
Yeah, I've got 2 announcements. The first one, I'm excited to report that the Camino software that the council budgeted for 21 and 22 is about to launch so that people can submit online building permit applications. We've been beta testing that with one of our builders, and we're working out the last few little bugs. The only frustrating thing is that you actually will have to look up your parcel number in order to get the process going. We can't just type in an address and have it auto-populate, but that's really the only bug that we haven't been able to work out, and that requires a bit more work from Camino's IT team. But I believe this will be live by the end of this week so that people can apply for permits online and also schedule their inspections online. The other announcement I wanted to make, while I was on vacation for a good chunk of September, I understand that my department provided a report on building permit and growth activity in the department. And in the past, I've really emphasized how many permits we're issuing, not how much growth or how many projects are actually being completed. And so when I dug into the data that they provided you, I realized that we have already, since April 1st, which we get our population and growth data April to April every year from the Office of Financial Management. Since April 1st of 2022, we've already issued 177 certificates of occupancy for single-family homes that provides housing for an estimated population of 455 new residents. Between now and next April 1st, we have 203 single-family homes actively under construction, which will likely be finished in that period of time, providing an additional 522 residents with housing is our projection. And finally, 2 out of the 10 multifamily projects that have been submitted for permits in the city are nearing completion for an additional 299 apartments in the city, providing an additional 599 residents. So our, right now, if I were to make a guess as to our April 1, 2023 population growth number, it's looking like 1,576 residents, which is a 9.6 annual percent growth rate. So that is truly enormous number. I think that a lot of cities in our region this year, because of just how the economy's been the last few years, are going to see similar growth rates. And so compared to our peers, it may not stand out as much as it does compared to looking at how much various cities have grown in previous years, but that would certainly put us in the upper echelon in the state of Washington for growth rates.
Charlie?
Nothing further. You've heard from me enough tonight, so.
Chief Brown, what do you have to share with us?
Well, I did have the letter from the yacht club, but thank you for
Sorry, I
sharing
stole
that
it.
out.
It ended up in my inbox.
No, I just wanted to update council again on staffing. Our latest goes on field training Thursday. So she's got 14 weeks of field training, and then she'll be on her own. Our academy graduate will be out in the field probably just after Christmas, and then he'll have 14 to 16 weeks in the field. And then Ms. Lund has been very, very gracious and helpful, and we have another on the 15th of this month, or next month rather, we've got another oral board, and we're hoping to find some laterals that are looking to come over. But again, we continue to have a good pool, and a lot of that is Ms. Lund making sure that we can get those things together. So again, appreciate the support of the council, and things are looking up in that end.
Ms. Wallace.
Yes, so just wanted to thank the council for allowing staff the opportunity to attend trainings and conferences. I will be attending the Washington Association of Public Records Officers training on Thursday. That's where I get most of my guidance of what to do and what not to do for jurisdictions. They talk about case law updates, which is what Ms. Archer presented to you on some of the facts of public disclosure risk, as well as body-worn cameras. There's a topic on that, which, as you may be aware or remember, that we will be initiating that soon. If not, we have already. So looking forward to hearing the discussions on those on Thursday. I was also awarded the opportunity to attend the Association of Washington Cities Risk Management Service Agency annual meeting, where I have been elected to serve on behalf of the city for 2 more years for the operating committee. And was also presented award, the city of Port Orchard, for reducing our risk factor rating average, and where brokers like to see our risk factor to be 1.0. The city of Port Orchard has reached a 0.75, which is below the average or the norm. And a lot of that is contributed to the council hiring great managers to acknowledge that not only their role to run the city, but also manage the risk. And with Debbie and Tony managing public works, and the chief managing law enforcement, and Debbie managing the rest of the crew here, has reduced our claims, and that has shown over the number of years. And for that, I present to you on behalf of the RMSA the Port Orchard 2022 loss control champion of keeping our risk factor at 0.75.
Great news.
Which, as you know, helps also our finance director manage our premium rates. So, yes. And that's all I have.
Okay. Ms. Lund, do you have anything you'd like to share?
After all of that, I just want to really reinforce you do have a great team here, and just wish you all a good evening.
Fortunately, our work is not done here tonight. We have an executive session for about 15 minutes here. Okay, well, that's right. Citizen comments, you're correct. Before we head into that executive session, though, we ask for any members of the public that wish to address the council. If you're online, you could use the raise your hand feature, and we would allow you to address the council. Seeing no one and no one in the audience, we will head into an executive session with no action to be taken afterwards. Charlie, would you like to state the statutes?
Yeah, certainly. The council will enter an executive session pursuant to RCW 423110, subpart 1, subpart I, to discuss the proposed legal risks of a proposed action where public discussion may have legal or financial consequences to the agency, and there will be no action to follow.
Right. See you